Good evening, everyone. This is certainly a very important subject, and this is Dr. Ron Weiss, as all of you know. He's a physician and farmer. He's a founder of the Ethos Health, a farm-based healthcare system that connects human health to the natural world and promotes mindful, healthy ways of living. At the center of his system is Ethos Farm, a 280-year-old working farm in Long Valley, New Jersey, which grows produce using regenerative methods. These living medicines are used as part of an evidence-based diet of whole plant foods to reverse and prevent chronic disease. Dr. Weiss is a diplomat of both the American Board of Internal Medicine and the American Board of Lifestyle Medicine. He also is an assistant professor for clinical medicine at Rutgers, New Jersey Medical School. On most days, he's not planting. You can find him practicing and teaching lifestyle medicine in an old wooden farmhouse, right in the middle of the growing fields. I'm going to have you clap for him in a moment, but I was also reminded to remind those of you who are doing CMEs, be sure to get them in by tomorrow. You have one more day. So go to the desk if you decide that you need to get your affairs in order, all right? Dr. Weiss.
Thank you. I already hit a wrong note. I forgot to turn on the microphone. So I've been a doctor, practicing primary care doctor for over 30 years. I've practiced in many places. Tall buildings and busy emergency rooms in inner cities. But today I have this view from my medical office. The medical office is in the middle of this farm. And this is the view from the office when patients come. Okay. How about now? So I have the great privilege, is that too loud? You guys of practicing in this natural setting. And in a moment I'm going to tell you why I chose to give a talk on breast cancer. But before I do that, and we talked about some of these things in my first lecture. Remember we talked about, for those of you who were there, about a cover crop? Yes. This is a cover crop. So this is the first thing that we planted on the farm when we bought it in 2011. This is almost a 300-year-old farm. It's been planted for several centuries, and for most of the 20th century, chemicals were applied to this farm. And the first thing we did to heal the farm was we cut out staked out our vegetable production field, and we covered it with this cover crop to heal the land. So what you're looking at is oats. This ends up to be your oatmeal in the morning, and it's ripening in early July, so that's why it's so golden. And underneath that, there's not only oats, but there is red clover that's growing. You cannot see it until the oats are harvested, and the straw falls to the ground as organic matter. And then for the next 2 years, the clover comes in, fixes nitrogen molecules, puts it into the soil as fertilizer, and the deep roots of the clover break up all of the compacted soil where tractors and heavy machinery has been driving over it and compacting it. So this is the first thing we planted. I said in one of my previous lectures, the reason why we use methods like this, these are called regenerative methods. They regenerate soil. Chemical-based farming is what I like to think of as a mining operation. It mines the soil. Mining is destructive, right? When a farmer plants something in the ground, and it's supposed to bear a vegetable or a seed or fruit, the plant, the way it works is it uses the microbiome of the soil, its little farm laborers, to gather up nutrients and minerals in the soil, and they're delivered to the plant. The plant pays off the farm workers in glucose molecules from photosynthesis, and then the plant assembles these nutrients into phytonutrients, which are very valuable molecules to fight cancer and do very high-level things for our health. And you're going to see some of these phytonutrients in the talk to come. But if you don't have the correct soil, if it's been destroyed by chemicals, if it doesn't have the right microbiome, just like our intestines need to have, the plant cannot assemble these cancer-fighting agents at high levels. It can't. So that's why we pay attention to the soil, and we restore it with these methods. I give this talk annually on our farm. It's open to the public every October for Breast Cancer Month, Awareness Month. And I give it every year in memory of my first cousin, Barbara Dworkin. No one in our family ever had breast cancer that I'm aware of. And this young lady, when I had just finished my training as a physician in my first or second year of training, when she was about 42 years of age, was diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer out of the blue. And she was dead within 18 months, despite treatment, surgeries, radiation, chemo, nothing helped her. And so I give this talk in her memory today, so we can help to prevent the disease she died from, and hopefully reverse it to some degree. Her situation reminds me that health is not luck. It is predetermined by the way we live. And in those ways we live, the most important aspect is food, the diet we eat. The ultimate decision that deciding moment that came upon me when I decided to go plant-based was because I'd seen so much suffering in my life as a primary care doctor, and Barbara was one of the patients I'd seen suffer, that I couldn't end up like that. So even though I was healthy and didn't have any medical conditions and take any medicines, I'd seen so much suffering that I began to realize that I just didn't want to live my life by luck or chance anymore. I want to determine the health that I will have for the next, God willing, 50 years. Okay, it's medical school time. Please bear with me for a second. My computer is not hooked up to this screen, so I have to juggle two devices at the same time. Okay. One of the first classes that they give you in medical school, oddly enough, is about prevention of disease. Even though you walk out of medical school knowing very little about prevention or being able to do anything about it, this is always one of the first classes that is taught. So I wanted to talk to you about prevention for a moment. Did anyone know there are three kinds of prevention? There's primary prevention, secondary prevention, and tertiary prevention. Let's go over these for a moment. Primary prevention is any technique that seeks to avert disease altogether. You don't even give it a chance to start. Can people give me an example of primary prevention of any disease?
Smoking. Stop smoking?
Never start smoking. Right? Someone said stop smoking. No. Never start smoking. Anyone else? Removing your breast. You mean if you have BRCA? BRCA? Well, yes, if you don't have subclinical breast cancer yet. That could be a primary preventive technique. Anyone else? Exercise, yes. Immunizations, right? We give our children immunizations so they don't get measles. Yes?
What we're talking about, eating.
What you're here for tonight. This is primary prevention, right? So primary prevention is the most powerful, always, hands down. They teach this to you in medical school. They teach you that it's the most powerful way, but they never teach you actually how to access it. So if you take a look at lifestyle medicine, basically that's pretty much all the techniques of primary prevention, right? You said exercise. We mentioned diet, right? And then like sleep and emotional health and, taking care of your microbiome. Those are all primary preventions. The only a common one outside of lifestyle habits I can think of is vaccines. I mean, the one that you talked about with the mammograms, that's a very, a specific situation. But I think for the average individual, it boils down to lifestyle behaviors. Let's go to the secondary techniques for disease prevention. Can anyone give me an example of this? Mammograms. So with secondary prevention, what you're trying to do is you already have a disease, and you assume that you may have the disease, and you're trying to find it as early as you can so you can intervene quickly and prevent death or severe damage from the disease.
Thermography?
Well, we don't really have data on thermography, significant data that is recognized that shows it as an adequate screening technique for breast cancer. So colonoscopies, right? That is secondary screening, right? The only thing you can do to prevent cancer is by, pretty much eating good food. Once you start doing colonoscopies on a person, you're trying to find cancer that is already developed early. How about pap smears? Secondary. So, do you get the feeling that when you go to an annual physical with your doctor, for the conventional doctor, if you go for like a wellness visit, the prevention part of it just basically consists of secondary, right? Oh, here's a prescription for your mammogram, here you go get your colonoscopy and get a pap smear. It's not primary. What is tertiary prevention? Tertiary prevention is the latest type of the late stage prevention, and it doesn't really primarily prevent any disease at all, but what it does is it tries to prevent complications or delay them from in situ diseases that are already occurring. For example, if you had breast cancer and it was metastatic and it spread to your hip bone, the radiation oncologist would radiate you, give you radiation to your hip so your hip doesn't fracture. That radiation treatment would help to protect you from breaking your hip. That's tertiary prevention. The least desirable, but sometimes necessary. We're just going to go past these a little bit. Okay, so we're going to talk about data that concerns mammography. So, by a show of hands, Do people here think that mammograms are decidedly effective or for finding breast cancer early enough to save women, or ineffective? Okay, well,
Maybe.
it's not clear. It's not clear. Different people have different opinions. The nation of Switzerland thinks that it's not effective. The government of Switzerland got rid of their mammogram recommendations. And we'll talk about what the United States federal government's recommendations are, but our current federal recommendations were affected by this Cochrane study. Does anyone know what the Cochrane Committee is? Cochrane Committee is a fantastic, very high-level committee of scientific analysis where they take studies from all over the world and they investigate certain areas of scientific question, and they analyze things, and then they make recommendations. So Cochrane ran a 10-year study where they looked at the data for mammograms to see whether getting mammogram screenings was truly an effective way to have secondary prevention for cancer. So this is what they found out. For every 2,000 women who get a mammogram screening, one life will be saved. Okay, so how many of us think that that's a very effective screening? You don't think it's effective? Yes. If it's Barbara's life, then it is. But you know what? You know the way it works with medical studies and population studies. You can't look at yourself as the individual. We draw conclusions from looking at data that come from vast populations, because that's how we can make decisions. So, you know, you can argue whether radiating 2,000 women, the expense and everything that occurs from it, is worth saving one life. You know, I could argue maybe it is worth it, you know. But let's go on to see what else happens. For every 2,000 women, not only will one life be saved, but 10 healthy women will become cancer patients who are untreated unnecessarily. Do you understand what that means? So, in addition to the one life you save, the next thing that happens is there are 10 women out of that 2,000. If they hadn't gotten the mammogram, they do have cancer, but the cancer wouldn't have ever been clinically apparent. It would have just been indolent or, subclinical, or never become apparent if they hadn't got mammogram. Each of these women could have lived to be 100 years old without any medical problems. And the mammograms, because they're so sensitive, will identify these women and turn them into cancer patients who are then having mastectomies and radiation and chemo that can kill them or give them heart failure. It can be very serious. Do you think it's worth it now? No. You don't? You ready to go on to the next category? For every 2,000 women screened with mammography, 200 healthy women will be given false alarms. That means that you'll get a mammogram reading that comes back, we can't give you further information. You need more studies. Either we have to look at your old mammograms, or you may need an ultrasound, or you have to undergo more diagnostic tests, and then perhaps you still will not be able to get an answer without getting biopsies. Eventually, these 200 women will be freed from this kind of screening, this intense screening, but perhaps after 2 years of intense, or 3 years, or maybe longer of intensive investigation. And it causes a lot of anxiety, right, to be undergoing all of this. So because of that, the federal government and our most respective guide on how we should screen ourselves for breast cancer comes from the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force. Their recommendations before this Cochrane Committee advisory came out, this study, were that, and I followed these recommendations when I started my practice of medicine, that a young woman get a mammogram at age 35 for the first time as a baseline. Then women were to get mammograms every 1 to 2 years, depending on the feelings of the physician, between the age of 40 and 50, and then every year from 50 until death. It doesn't matter if you're 105 years old, you should still be getting a mammogram. And because of the data I just showed you, the federal task force very much reduced the recommendation. Look how they reduced it. Now no one gets a mammogram before age 50. So in other words, I told you about my cousin Barbara. She wouldn't have ever been screened whatsoever. And now you only get a mammogram every 2 years, between the age of 50 to 74, not every year, and then no more mammograms after 74. Okay, this is the American Cancer Society's recommendations, and they're slightly more intense. They recommend yearly evaluation at age 40, and then yearly evaluation starting at age 45. It was before at age 40, and then every other year at age 55, but they don't have a cutoff age. Okay. So now that we talked about that, let's get to the part about lifestyle and primary prevention and reversal. Okay. Who can identify that flower? Yes. That's because you're a Canadian. Canada grows a lot of flaxseed, don't it? This beautiful blue flower. It is so blue. Have you ever seen them up close? Are they that blue?
They are.
They're true blue. One of the really truest, bluest flowers. Blue is an unusual color for flowers, but that flax is so beautiful. So flax is one of the most ancient plants that we have. It was one of the first plants domesticated that we have evidence of. We have found caves in Europe where there is evidence that, archaeological evidence that human beings were starting to domesticate flax from wild plants from about 20,000 BCE, 10,000 years before the onset of farming. Does anyone know what ancient, very valuable product comes from the flax plant besides flax seeds? Linen. Right. Isn't that amazing? Linen comes from the plant fibers. It's a very valuable plant. Gandhi said, wherever flaxseed becomes a regular food item among the people, there will be better health. Okay. So let's talk for a moment about lignans. Lignans are the Western world's equivalent of soy phytoestrogens. Lignans are actually a phytoestrogen. And they happen to be, you're going to see now these series of molecules that I put up here, they are those plant phytonutrients I told you about. Whether it's genistein from soy, or isothiocyanates in the broccoli you're eating, or lignans in flax seeds, plants use these molecules as weapons to defend themselves and in their own environment, to kill off pests or to make it possible for them to reproduce. They're very high-level molecules. Over a couple of million years of evolution, human beings commandeered these molecules, and we have evolved to use them to better our own health. So flax seeds contain lignans, these phytoestrogens. Actually, they don't contain lignans, they contain lignin precursors. Guess what you need to have in order to go from the lignin precursors to lignans? An excellent gut microbiome, someone said. So without that excellent microbiome, you really don't have access to the full complement of those lignans. And as a matter of fact, there is an impressive study that has shown that women who have recurrent urine infections, who take recurrent courses of antibiotics, have a higher risk of getting breast cancer. And we think it may be because they're killing or they disrupt the gut microbiome by taking antibiotics, and then they don't have the microbiota to convert lignin precursors into lignans. So here's the list of lignin-containing foods, and as you can see, look what a superstar flaxseed is. For a 1 ounce serving has 85 milligrams of lignans. Nothing else even comes close except for some sesame seeds.
Can you read that for us? We can't see from
Okay. Flax seeds, a 1 ounce serving is 85 milligrams of total lignans. Sesame seeds, the runner-up for 1 ounce, has 11 milligrams. And then curly kale, a half a cup, broccoli, half a cup, apricots, it's insignificant. It's like 0.8, 0.6, 0.4 milligram, 0.3, 0.2, strawberries, tofu, dark rye bread, less than a milligram. So just so you can get an idea of what the average person's lignin intake is per day, is everyone aware that in Long Island there was a cluster, an identified cluster of breast cancer cases, really like in the 70s or 80s? So the Long Island Breast Cancer Study Project sprung out of that cluster. And so being interested in lignans, the researchers measured the average amount of lignans that these women consumed every day, and we found that it was an average of 6.3 milligrams of lignans per day. How many milligrams of lignans does a teaspoon of flaxseed have? 1 teaspoon. That was for an ounce. 6. So eating 1 teaspoon of ground flaxseed would give you this amount of lignans. So the reason why I put flax seeds up front is because there's so much data on them and their potential to prevent and to help treat breast cancer, that I'm going with the flax seeds first, and I'll go over some of this data with you. So there was a study that showed that 1 teaspoon, just that 6 milligrams of flax seeds per day, was found to significantly lower the Ki-67 marker. That's a breast cancer marker that we can measure that indicates aggressivity of the breast cancer. And if you have elevated levels of this Ki-67, it means that your breast cancer has a higher risk of metastasizing and killing you. So it was seen in this study that these were not women who had breast cancer, but they were just young women who did not yet have breast cancer, but they had these high markers. And 1 teaspoon of flaxseed daily significantly lowered these markers. And then from the Ontario Women's Diet and Health Study, consumption of flax seeds is associated with a 20 to 30% reduction in breast cancer risk, of developing breast cancer, right? This is primary prevention. Got it? So how about if you have breast cancer already? In the Western New York Exposures and Breast Cancer Study, there was substantial improvement in the survival of postmenopausal breast cancer women who had the higher lignin intake, composed to the lower quartile of lignin intake. And in this study in clinical cancer research, in just 5 weeks, postmenopausal women who had been diagnosed with breast cancer who ate flax seeds had significant reduction in tissue markers for cancer cell proliferation and aggressiveness. Again, that means that they were much less likely to migrate and to metastasize. Say it again? I don't know the amount, but people who ate flax seeds daily. I don't know if it was a teaspoon. If you're interested, I can go back and I can find out the average. But the people who ate the flax seeds daily had significant reductions in those tissue markers. I could find out exactly how much that was. Just come up to me afterwards. So because of this, we recommend to our patients that they eat 3 tablespoons of ground flax seeds daily. That would be equivalent to 9 times, right, the dose of lignans that those Long Island breast cancer patients were consuming.
When you say your patients with breast cancer?
All of our patients, for primary prevention and secondary prevention. I'll take a question. Why don't we take questions at the end? You can go first.
The Swedish study. The Swedish. Oh.
You'll go first.
Okay. Let's talk about soy for a moment. So, Brenda Davis went over this in one of her fantastic lectures. And I noticed this too, that when breast cancer patients come to us from conventional oncologists, they apparently are still being told to avoid soy products routinely. However, as she explained, the data powerfully shows otherwise. And here it is. So on the x-axis, you have 5 years in terms of months, 60 months of survival. On the y-axis, you have the percent of women surviving, okay, after diagnosis of breast cancer. And this is all comers, women who have metastatic breast cancer, women who have very early breast cancer, women who get all kinds of treatments, lumpectomies or mastectomies or radiation or medication. So what was found out in this analysis of these 3 studies was that the women who had the most soy had a significant increase in survival by the end of the 5 years, which amounted to over 30% increase. And that's irregardless of what else they were doing. The amount of soy that was considered the most averaged to be about the amount of genistein in about a cup of soy milk a day. The women at the bottom, least soy or without soy, basically were having 0 soy products. So we now have information and research that indicates why this might be. and of how genistein interacts with our BRCA genes to help breast cancer survival. And let me take a moment to explain this. So BRCA is a breast cancer suppressing gene. It's a tumor suppressor gene. So it is a good thing to have, and you want it operating. And the problem is that women such as, we all heard about Angelina Jolie. Remember, she wrote this big New York Times article where she had to have mastectomies and her uterus was taken out because she had disrupted BRCA genes. There were mutations that didn't allow her genes to naturally kill off breast cancer. There's now powerful evidence that shows almost all of these mutations, not only BRCA mutations, but all kinds of mutations occur through epigenetic influences on our genes. In other words, there are molecules that climb on top of our genes that we inherit from our parents. And then these molecules, which commonly are contaminants from the environment, like pesticides or agricultural chemicals or dioxin or PCBs, they can affect how these genes are expressed. And what we are beginning to understand is the way genistein operates is it comes along to a disabled gene of BRCA, and it takes off unlocks the straitjacket of these chemical inhibitors and frees them. And so the woman's straitjacketed BRCA becomes more active, and that's how the tumors can be increasingly suppressed and survival rate increases.
Question.
Let's save questions until the end.
Can you speak to the difference between
I'll take all of your questions at the end, I promise.
Okay.
Just mark them down. Okay. So, the beautiful deep red color of tomatoes is a pigment called lycopene. The reason why I put this slide up here is to show the importance of lycopene, particularly in one kind of breast cancer. And that breast cancer is hormone negative breast cancer. Breast cancers can have receptors that bind to hormones like estrogen, and then the growth of the breast cancer is driven by estrogen molecules that bind to those receptors. And we've come to know that probably the most bleak type of diagnosis for breast cancer someone can get is a hormone-negative breast cancer diagnosis. And it usually occurs in younger women. It can occur in African-American women. And if you get a diagnosis of this hormone-negative breast cancer, recurrences are much more likely, and there are really no good treatments for this kind of cancer. So it was exciting to see that in this pooled analysis of these 8 studies, that there was a 22% decrease in breast cancer risk from lycopenes, and the lycopenes of all the carotenoids they were studying had the most powerful effect, and especially in women who had estrogen-negative breast cancers. So, because of that, we recommend that women eat a daily dose of cooked tomatoes with some nuts or seeds. So why cooked? We alluded to this in a previous lecture, because cooking tomatoes dramatically increases the amount and concentration of lycopene, which again is one of these phytonutrients that develops at higher levels when plants are grown well. So the longer you cook tomatoes, for example, sauce versus a raw tomato, or even paste versus the cooked tomatoes, the higher the amounts of lycopene you will find. And of course, since lycopene is a carotenoid, it's a vitamin A family molecule, and vitamin A molecules are fat soluble. They get into us better in the presence of fat. We say to eat a little bit of seeds or nuts with that, so you have a healthy fat, and it would aid in its absorption. So mushrooms and aromatase inhibitors. The aromatase inhibitors are a newer class of medication that is given to breast cancer patients to help disrupt the formation of estrogen, which of course would be a fertilizer in estrogen-positive receptor breast cancers, from androgens. So, but the amazing thing is, the way this drug was developed was because it was first found in mushrooms. That's where it was first identified. And here's a study which shows that the aromatase inhibitors that exist in mushrooms, at least in vitro, were significant in acting against breast cancer cells. So we recommend that women eat 5 large cooked mushrooms daily, and the type of mushroom, oddly enough, that seemed to be most effective was the common white button mushroom. They tested shiitake mushrooms, fancy mushrooms, all kinds of mushrooms, and the larger versus the smaller white button mushrooms edged out every other mushroom in the concentrations of this aromatase activity. Let's talk about cruciferous vegetables and isothiocyanates. So when someone cooks kale in the house, or Brussels sprouts, or broccoli, what is the smell and the aroma in the house? It smells like rotten eggs, right? Doesn't it? There's a sulfur-like aroma in the air. And that sulfurous aroma is coming from these compounds. They're called isothiocyanates. Sulforaphane, which is the most common one that's found in broccoli, has been shown to arrest the growth of human breast cancer cells in vitro. And in this very large and well-known breast cancer study, the Women's Healthy Eating and Living Study, which had over 3,000 breast cancer patients, eating 5 servings of fruits and vegetables per day and walking for 30 minutes 6 days per week cut your risk of dying in half. And if one of those 6 servings of vegetables was cruciferous, the risk of death is cut again further in half. Such a powerful action those cruciferous isothiocyanates have. We recommend eating 8 to 16 ounces of preferably raw cruciferous vegetables, or 1.5 cups of broccoli sprouts daily. So, is everyone familiar with the concept of myrosinase, which is the activating enzyme in these cruciferous vegetables? I'll go over that for a moment. So, in order to access these powerful anti-cancer agents, these sulfur-containing agents, there's a little catalyst, a chemical catalyst enzyme, which is called myrosinase, which is very heat labile. It's destroyed, or it's inactivated by heat. So if you eat cooked broccoli, you could eat 2 boxes worth, or cooked kale, you will not access this important enzyme. If you eat it raw, you will. If you eat Frozen broccoli, you won't, because frozen broccoli is flash heated when it's processed. So you have to be careful to, the only thing you have to, it's still good to eat these vegetables cooked, but what you should be doing is you should be introducing a small portion of the live enzyme in a live mouthful or handful of some cruciferous plant. It doesn't matter if it's a radish, a turnip, give me all the cruciferous plants. Cabbage, cauliflower, kale, Brussels sprouts, mustard greens. Where's Dr. Esselstyn where you reading? Right, he has it down pat. Collard greens, no, not chard. Chard's in the beet family. Daikon. Radishes, we said turnips. Bok choy, kohlrabi. We can keep going. Okay. We were treated on this ship for the past week with very fantastic and fresh what? Watercress. That's one of them. You're forgetting a cruciferous member that has the highest concentration of nitrates of any vegetable. Dr. Esselstyn went over this, the nitric oxide issue in his talk yesterday, right? Does anyone know what that is? It's a cruciferous vegetable. Arugula. Arugula, higher than beets. Yeah, okay. And then there's about 40 others that we're really not familiar with, but they're found in Asian markets. Typically, like when you go to a Chinese produce market, you see these vast numbers of greens that are not recognizable to you. Most of them are cruciferous Asian greens.
Is ecomount a...
No. Beets and bile acid. So, what is the story with beets and bile acids? Bile acid is they're detergents that are, bile is a detergent that is made by our liver, and it accumulates in our gallbladder, it's squeezed out into our intestines when we have a fatty meal, and there are bile acids that are contained within the bile. And these bile and bile acids act as detergents to break up fats. There's one little problem though. As these bile acid detergents go down into our intestine, there are certain members of our microbiome which act upon them and convert them into secondary bile acids, and these are known to be highly carcinogenic. Highly. And then they are generally absorbed back into us. These bile acids are known to be powerful mutagenic agents. They damage DNA. And the scary part is that breast tissue sequesters. Breast tissue loves to sequester these bile acids at 100 times greater the concentration than in our blood. So the greatest concentration of these mutagenic bile acids ends up in the breast tissue. And the study you see down below identified elevated bile acid levels of newly diagnosed breast cancer patients. They were 50% higher than in women without breast cancer. Wouldn't it be great if we could eat something that would bind up these mutagenic and very dangerous bile acids? We can. Beets. Beets are the champions of binding these bile acids, so that they're just pass through us and they're never reabsorbed back into our circulation. As you can see, we had the pleasure of having okra this afternoon, right? That's the number 2 vegetable. Who'd figure? I never thought okra was much good for anything, but here you go. Number 2. beats out kale. And the important thing to remember is that when you steam these vegetables, instead of baking them or eating them raw, see, here's another example. We talked about cooked tomatoes. Now we're talking about steaming these vegetables, where raw vegetables are not always the best way to go. The cooking methods can empower the vegetables to be more medicinal for us, and in this case, the cooking beets doubles their, bile acid binding capacity. So we recommend that our patients eat a daily dose of steamed beets.
Is that true of the beet green also?
This study was just done with beets, not beet greens. However, beet greens in general have much higher of many phytonutrients, higher levels than the beet itself. But they did not test beet greens, they only tested the beets themselves, the beet roots.
What's the dose?
What's the dose?
I don't have any dosage recommendation here because there wasn't any study done. I'm giving you the basic science, and because it's so powerful, and because those bile acids are so hazardous, I would just eat beets every day. No study has been done that I'm aware of that indicates a dose, but generally we would tell our breast cancer patients, a typical can of beets maybe has about 15 ounces, almost a pound of beets. They're heavy. So have a couple of beets, a large beet or several, medium-sized beets.
There you go.
So foods to avoid and why. So the reason why I put this picture up is I usually give this talk on the farm, and a lot of the times we don't have plant-based people coming. They're people who are eating healthy diets like wild salmon, Greek yogurt, and free cage-free hens without the skin, baked chicken breast. So the average omnivorous eater thinks that this is a healthy diet. But I put these pictures up to enforce that it is anything but healthy. So I want to talk about heterocyclic amines. Heterocyclic amines are some of the most powerful food-associated carcinogens we know of. And the interesting thing is that they are not found in these animal products themselves. It is not found in the fish flesh or the chicken breast or the steak. They occur when these animal flesh items hit hot metal and have contact with hot cooking surfaces, and then these powerful carcinogens develop. They are some of the most powerful carcinogens found in cigarette smoke that make cigarette smoking dangerous. And believe it or not, as you can see, people think that fish is healthy. It is only second to bacon in the number and concentrations of these dangerous heterocyclic amines when it's cooked. More dangerous than beef. Had anyone heard about, think about in the 1980s, we were told not to barbecue. Remember those reports? Because carcinogens developed when we barbecued hamburgers and steaks on the grill, and it sort of disappeared. This is that warning. It was about heterocyclic amines, but nobody really pays attention to it anymore. And then later studies found out it wasn't beef was the least problem we had as far as these carcinogens were concerned. Chicken is higher and fish is higher than that. More than 85% of breast cancers are sporadic, right? Like Barbara. They occur out of the blue. And attributable to long-term exposure to environmental carcinogens, such as those in the diet through a multi-step disease process progressing from non-cancerous to pre-malignant and malignant stages. And this is just a little diagram of a cell which has a mutation, and then it doubles and quadruples and turns into a malignant tumor when exposed to these carcinogens. So we went over the effects of alcohol on cancer. Not to dwell on that. We go over it more extensively in the alcohol lecture, but alcohol is categorized as a class 1 carcinogen by the World Health Organization in the same category as the processed meats like hot dogs and cigarette smoking and asbestos. So it is now known from the Harvard Nurses Health Study analysis that as few as 3 drinks a week, that is 4 to 5 ounces of red wine 3 times a week, can elevate your risk of getting breast cancer. So, before I go over this list, I just wanted to say, we've been talking about chemical carcinogenic abilities to create cancer, but the animal foods themselves have there are many mechanisms by which animal proteins can induce cancer growth. The great Colin Campbell, who is my mentor, this is the basis of his life's work. As we know, animal proteins can increase insulin growth factor type 1, which is a very powerful inducer of cancer growth through vascular endothelial growth factor. It causes and enables tiny cancer cells to go and hook up and hijack a blood supply, and then, they can grow larger and out of control. But there are many other mechanisms too. And short of that, I'm just going to go over some of the contaminants, because we polluted our world to such a degree, that are concentrated in animal foods. So this is beyond just the pure protein and constituent of the animal food that causes cancer. These are very potent carcinogens in and of themselves, and perfluorochemicals, which are like non-stick surfaces like Teflon, and even these non-stick surfaces, more modern ones that are used today, like in non-stick fryers. They're found in meat and fish predominantly. PCBs, DDT, which was one of the first pesticides that came out, the heavy metals, dioxins. Of course, we went over the heterocyclic amines already. So, I know you guys, most of you are eating a plant-based diet, but when I show this to a general audience, by this point they are just almost prostrate on the floor. They're very overwhelmed. So what I like to do is I like to end with this clip, because it shows you what is possible and how powerful a plant-based diet can be in the face of breast cancer, even when almost all hope is lost. And when I watch this clip, I just think that if Barbara had wanted to adopt a plant-based diet, and I tried at the time, but she was not willing, that maybe something good could have happened with her. Can you hear it?
had been a runner for 14 years, in fact, a marathoner. 47 years old, at the top of my game.
In 1982, Ruth Heydrich's running career came to a sudden stop when she was diagnosed with breast cancer. After a mastectomy, her doctors recommended chemotherapy and radiation to treat the cancer that had by then spread to her lungs and bones. Ruth decided to visit Dr. John McDougall instead.
I said, Ruth, I've spent my residency collecting information on diet and breast cancer. It's all in these files right here. Sit in my office and read through it and see what you think.
He said, these are the studies that show what I'm trying to prove is that diet can reverse breast cancer.
And she read it, and she comes out and she says, okay, I've changed my diet. She changed her diet.
So he showed me how to eat, no added oils, lots of fruits and vegetables, whole grains.
Ruth then started training for the Ironman Triathlon in Hawaii, which combines running a marathon with long-distance biking and swimming.
I became obsessed. Kept up the running, of course, never stopped, and then added swimming, biking, and for good measure, lifted weights. And people were saying, you're crazy, you're a cancer patient, you should be resting. Doctors told me this. I felt so good, I felt fit, I wanted to maintain that level of fitness, and I felt sure that if I had a healthy body and I was putting the right food into it, that I could beat this cancer.
At the Ironman Triathlon, Ruth won a gold medal in her age group.
Stuck with the diet, found out my arthritis disappeared, my constipation disappeared, my dandruff disappeared. No sign of depression, which you might expect with a cancer diagnosis. I felt renewed, invigorated, and out to show that diet is so much more important than anybody ever thought.
Other women get over breast cancer, colon cancer, prostate cancer. There are people who have had metastatic prostate cancer all over the body who have gone through what we call spontaneous remission. In other words, they've been cured. It's not the end of the world when you get this diagnosis. Some people get over it. Ruth did.
So I'm still racing, still daily training. Now, how many people in their 70s are doing triathlons? Not very many. So that gives hope for all of us as we age, that not only will you stay healthy and beat the degenerative diseases that most people get, but you can start collecting medals.
We're back? Yes, good. And as far as I know Ruth Heydrich has a very active Facebook page. She's still running. She's in her early 80s, I think, by now. Okay. So we'll take questions in a moment. Just wanted to make a few announcements, and I'm going to put a little slideshow of our farm up for you to enjoy. For those of you who haven't attended any of my other lectures, I made an announcement that we have these fantastic farm days coming up, where each day, which occurs once a month throughout the growing season, starting in May through November, includes a farm tour of our growing and production methods. It includes a wonderful community potluck lunch and a fantastic speaker, a top-level plant-based speaker. So you're all welcome to that. They're free and open to the public. All you have to do is just go to our website, which is ethoshealth.org, and the schedule for these events should be up within the next 2 weeks, and they occur throughout the season. We're about an hour west of Manhattan, and you can also follow us on Facebook at My Ethos Health. And we always post, alerts to the events as they're going to occur. Okay. Can I have questions, please?
The lady back there.
Okay, this young lady.
Yeah, thank you. It was about, and when you began your speech, it was about flax. There was a study that came out last year, I think, in Sweden, that pointed out that there was a cyanide content in flax, and they were no longer recommending it. And the only reason I know this is because I've got Swedish family who think I'm killing my sweetie because I put ground flaxseed on his cereal every morning.
Was this, so this young lady said there's a Swedish study
Yeah.
that revealed that there were high concentrations of cyanide in flaxseed. Is that because the cyanide was a contaminant, or is it a naturally occurring
I believe
cyanide component of the seed?
I think it's naturally recurring, but that's why I'm asking you. I do know that Michael Greger responded to this particular study by saying that perhaps instead of 3 tablespoons, he was taking his recommendation down to not even 1. But there was also a study with prostate cancer guys that 3 tablespoons kept not the control group, but the group that got the 3 tablespoons from having to have prostate surgery. So the 3 tablespoons sounds right to my ear. I'm just a little concerned about the cyanide business.
Well, I am not aware of this cyanide advisory, so I will go investigate it. Thank you. It surprises me because from thousands of years, this flaxseed has been known to be such a font and a well of health, and as you can see, increasing amounts of lignans have been shown from an evidence-based standpoint to really be preventive as far as breast cancer is concerned, and from a reversal standpoint. Cyanide is I can't say it's a carcinogen, but it will just kill you outright. So, apple seeds, for example, have cyanide in them. We can tolerate a few of them if you chew them, but I will research that, and I'll tell you what, if you catch me on tomorrow, I'll try to research it tonight and see what I can find out. Yes.
Dr. Weiss, what is your take on tomatoes being a nightshade and inflammation, not having nightshade for inflammation?
This young lady asked, what is my take on nightshade vegetables? In as far as nightshade vegetables in some people, in other words, the potatoes, the tomatoes, the peppers, and the potatoes, can cause inflammation, you mean of arthritis and joints? Yeah. So for the average person, I think that the average person should be eating a lot of these things. They're high levels of very important and unique phytonutrients in eggplants and in potatoes, in tomatoes and in peppers.
Even with osteoarthritis?
I have not noticed clinically, because I take care of a lot of osteoarthritis patients, that it affects osteoarthritis patients. I have seen it in certain individuals affect autoimmune conditions, autoimmune arthritises. Rarely in rheumatoid arthritis, sometimes it can be quite inflammatory. So if a patient has one of these diseases and they're not complaining, I let them eat these vegetables. If we have identified that it is a cause of symptoms in them, they have to be avoided. So for the general person, they should partake of these nightshade vegetables. Yes, ma'am.
Phytoestrogens are good, and you put a limit of 1 cup of soy milk. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Phytoestrogens are good. You put limit of 1 cup of soy milk. On the vegan diet, if we eat miso soup and tofu scramble and soy milk, we've exceeded that. And what happens if you combine the phytoestrogens from lignans from flaxseed and also soy? Do you know that?
Well, the reason why I made that recommendation of the 1 cup of soy milk was because that was derived from that meta-analysis of those three major studies as being the amount that significantly increased survival of all those women. That's why I said that. You have to remember, first of of all, the phytoestrogens that come from genistein, they're different molecules than the phytoestrogens that come from flaxseed. So they're different. There's no reason, just because you're getting one source of phytoestrogen, not to get another one from a different plant. So I would still eat the flax seeds. And I'm sorry?
Is more better?
More than 1 cup?
Yeah, it's more soy.
Don't know. I guess it's okay, but I don't think there's any specific data show that. I think that Brenda Davis showed some data that you should have about this amount, right? In her, and it wasn't, I don't think it was necessarily linked to breast cancer, but about this amount of soy, maybe a half a cup or a cup. Yes, sir.
Well, for the men in the audience, is
Yeah.
it true that some of these foods could benefit them in their prostate situations?
Yes. There's increasingly emerging evidence that these phytoestrogens in soy help prostate cancer, to help prevent it, and the same thing with the phytoestrogens in flaxseed. There is evidence that they are beneficial in the prevention of prostate cancer, so absolutely. And you have to remember, I mean, I took out these one molecules, the one specific molecule in each of these foods, because those are the molecules that have been focused on in these studies. However, the wonderful thing about plants, as Colin Campbell says, is they're a symphony of all these swirling molecules that end up collaborating together to give us good health. So there's a lot of other things in there that can help not only breast, but prostate and colon cancer and, atherosclerotic disease. So definitely, if men were to eat all of these recommended foods, you'd also have a good, healthy starting point. Do I believe in taking probiotics? So, do you mean in pill form? I don't. Because we don't really know enough about them. And I think that taking, number one, prebiotics, in other words, the feedstocks that help the the bacteria in our gut that's already there, which are the leaves and the whole fruits and the whole vegetables that we eat every day, those tilt those communities and foster the good bacteria and the gills that communicate, which give us our health. There's some interesting data coming out about probiotics, bacteria that is on produce. And we now know that conventional produce has different bacterial communities than organic or well-grown produce that comes from good soil. And I find that very interesting. And we do know that people who grow up on farms have, sometimes they have altered incidences of diseases of immune dysregulation like asthma and allergies. And so there's some evidence that bacteria from the farm is colonizing them and getting onto them and changing the way the incidence of disease. So I advise people, instead of taking probiotic pills, to eat a lot of whole plant foods and to try to get them from sources where they've come from a healthy soil, where a lot of these bacteria are living anyway, and then they get on the produce, and then they can get on to you and in you.
I was wondering, since you're so in tune with the soil and the health of our farms, if you're familiar with Dr. Zach Bush and what he's trying to turn around conventional farmers to become organic farmers
Yes.
and regenerate the land.
Yes,
It seems like something that would align with what you do.
Yes, I'm aware of his work. I know I think he's been on the Rich Roll podcast, right? And I listened to they were very interesting. I think he has a lot of interest in glyphosate, a Roundup, which is probably the predominant pesticide that we have in our country. they probably, maybe over 1 billion pounds is applied every year now. And, yeah, so I am aware of him, and, I hope that, I hope he advances his work, and I think it would be a good thing. Less than 1% of our agriculture is organic. The 99% uses these chemicals, which are just completely destroying our environment. So I think it would be good if the federal government promotes these methods as a way of sustainable farming, and then I think it would really take off.
Are foods in whole food, organic vegetables and whole foods, would that be considered good soil?
So this lady has all the organic foods, is the organic produce at Whole Foods?
Yeah, because so many people.
That's an often asked question. So the question is, can you trust USDA certified organic? That's what you're asking. Right? In general, no. You can't. You can trust them that some procedure is being followed. For example, they don't have glyphosate on them, and they don't have most chemicals on them. The organic certification still does allow some plant-based pesticides, and some of them are extremely powerful and dangerous.
So where do you get them?
You should go to your local farmer. If there's at this day and age, most towns have a farmer's market, right? Where farmers from a close area come in, and you can go there. A lot of small farmers, because it's very expensive and tedious to maintain the certification and records, they just don't. So, however, they're very proud of what they do, and all you have to ask the farmers, what are your growing methods? And they'll tell you. They'll usually say chemical-free, no chemicals, no pesticides. You just have to ask them, and then if you really are that interested, they'll invite you to the farm to take a look. And if you walk on that farm, and if you don't see any chemicals, and if you see they're using compost, and they're using cover crops, and they're doing these kinds of things, then you know that they're growing good soil.
My husband has always been interested in aquaponics, and this trip has made me go from organic meat eater to I'm going to be a vegan. We are about to buy a house with chickens, which I've always wanted, so no more eggs, but he wants an aquaponic system in a greenhouse. So how does that line up with my animal, with the fish feeding the plants? Like, is that going to be a no-go now? Because are we going to have to find something?
So organic farmers are very upset with aquaponics because the federal government has decided to classify them, have an organic certification for aquaponics as long as they don't use pesticides in them. But the basis of growing healthy food is in the soil. It's not in the water. Remember, I began the talk by describing the way a plant grows its food. It has workers in the soil. That's just like you have a microbiome, the plants have a microbiome, and there are billions of organisms that live in the soil. And if those organisms are not there, you can grow the plant, but it will never get high levels of these important anti-cancer fighting agents.
So the fish waste is not enough microbiome that it's being.
But it's not soil.
Okay.
I'm sure it has bacteria in it, but plants evolved over billions of years with these microorganisms. That's the way they work. Think of it like this. Plants, that's the intestinal tract. The workers in the soil are the intestinal tract for the plant. Plants don't have a GI tract. They absorb stuff from the soil, the minerals, and the elements they need from these workers that digest them and then give them to the plant. And water doesn't have them. I know water has bacteria in it, but they're not soil bacteria. So, I know you can if you put in nitrogen, phosphorus, they give you a chemical packet to put in the water. It will grow, but it won't have the levels of these important molecules that you need. Okay. Thank you so much.